dirty chain? Tired of wearing out parts quickly? Here's a how to deep clean your drivetrain. Your drivetrain sees a lot of the trail. Now, I know it doesn't have eyeballs, so seeing is probably the wrong word, but it will feel a lot of the trail. What do I mean? Well, just think about where your drivetrain's positioned on your bike. It's pretty much as low as your tyres. And okay, if you're doing mountain biking properly, that should be the only contact point, but the tyres will chuck up lots of spray and lots of, well, the trail, and it will go straight onto your drivetrain. So your drivetrain will feel almost all of that trail, be it mud, be it grit, sand, all of the horrible things. Okay, we don't have to get hyper nerdy like the roadies and worry about minute differences in lost watts with different chain lubes, but having a clean drivetrain, and specifically a clean chain, will save you not just watts, but actually save you, well, lots of money. So here's a step-by-step on how to deep clean your drivetrain. I'll admit, even I've fallen into the bad habits of getting back from a muddy ride and just rinsing down your bike and making it look sort of clean without actually paying attention to cleaning the bit that's the most important on your bike, which is the drivetrain. Okay, people might argue that suspension is more important, but that's got seals on it, and a lot of the bearings and a lot of the stuff that is important on your drivetrain doesn't have seals. And, well, cleaning it is really important. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. So, how to degrease it and how to clean your drivetrain? Well, depending on what lubes you've been using, you can have slightly different approaches. We use PT's Lube on the channel, they're one of our partners, and they make a really nice range of chain lubes. They also do a clever line of drivetrain degreaser, and these two products, even though they're kind of quite different, are paired together. So the degreaser is actually quite mild because it's been designed just to work on their lubes, and it means that you can use it on the bike. Now, if you've not used PT's and you've used a thicker, cruddier chain lube, we're going to have a different approach. Again, PT's has got you covered there too because they've got some stronger solvents, but we're going to show you all the ways to clean your drivetrain next. As you might imagine, the first step to deep clean your drivetrain is to give it a bit of a wash. It doesn't have to be super intensive, but cleaning most of the crud off your bike is a really good first step. Don't worry about spending loads of time on the drivetrain because, well, that's what we're doing now. Now it's time to degrease stuff. Let's get busy. Well, just before we go too wild, glasses, gloves, kind of essential because even mild degreasers or foaming agents aren't very good for your eyeballs, and the harsher stuff isn't very good on your skin. So glove up and wear some protective eyewear. Now, the best way to degrease and really scrub everything in a good way is to take it off your bike. You might wonder why. I can degrease stuff on my bike. You can, but what can happen is that degreaser will migrate to places where you want to keep grease, be that, well, bearings inside your hubs, bearings inside your bottom bracket, if you've got a suspension bike, into some of those bearings. So we're going to do a small strip down of all the parts that we can easily take off, and then we're going to give them a scrub off the bike. It'll be much better, and that's even if you're using lubes that are designed to work with milder degreasers, or if you're using harsher stuff where you've got stickier lube. So time to take bits off a bike. Remove the rear wheel, remove the chain. Depending on the system, best practice says you should replace the quick link. That's officially the best case. Remove the cassette. If you're super keen, removing the cranks is often actually quicker and easier than removing the chainring, but depending on what bolt configuration you've got, remove the chainring. The rear mech can stay on. With the drivetrain removed, now it's time for that deep clean, so make sure you've got your gloves on. We're going to use a metal tin like this, then we're going to place lots of the parts, like the chain, in there and leave them to soak because they're the cruddiest and they need the most time for the sort of chemical degreaser to work. And then on the other parts, we're going to do a chemical and physical clean. Try and spread the chain out so it's as flat as possible. This is quite crusty, but my confession or admission is it's not my bike, so I don't feel as bad. Pop it sort of into the bottom where most of the degreaser will form and cover it with the spray. I can hear that fizzing away, working its magic. Now, I'm going to put this to one side to work on the other bits and bobs of the drivetrain, which need a real scrub down. But you can use exactly the same process if you were using a much more aggressive degreaser. Use it in a controlled space, spraying it into the tin and leaving your chain in there to just degrade. We're leaving it just for a chemical clean to begin with. We'll come back to it later. We're going to start on the other grubby bits. Next part to degrease is the crankset. And I'm going to use this handy brush to scrub away all the detritus that I can before using a cloth to do a bit of a chemical clean in a similar way to the chain. You could use the foaming degreaser, but this is a deep dive, so we want to get rid of as much muck and, well, I'm going to say hopefully it's old leaves and mud. Could be something else. Okay, that's got a lot of the loose detritus and mud. Now it's time to do what the chain is doing already, which is sort of a chemical clean, and we're going to do a later physical clean. So for that, I'll need a cloth, because opposed to just sort of misting everything on my workbench with the foam, I'm just going to spray it on the cloth and then rub it and work it around. And whilst I'm moving around the chainring, I'm going to look for, well, if there's any bent teeth. Some of those might be able to get bent back, and just looking for wear as well. So the axle is lovely and clean, but check yours as you're cleaning. Before we move on to the next step, we just need to double check on that chain and see how it's going with that chemical clean. And if you've got time and you've got the inclination, what I would do is flip the chain over and give it another bath in the degreaser. Be that the kind of milder foaming ones or the really tough stuff. With the chain's other side now getting its chemical clean or chemical peel, time to work on the cassette. Depending on what cassette you've got, which is down to often what free hub standard, whether you've got a SRAM one, which is XD, whether you've got a Shimano newer style microspline or MS, or you've got an older, very common HG or Hyperglide cassette. They're going to all come apart in different ways. So this Shimano one here does come apart in 2 or 3 pieces, so just make sure that you keep all of the pieces together, because there's a very slim spacer in between some of the cogs, and you need to make sure that that goes back in the right space. You can stack them up, but make sure the stack stays as you left it, and then you won't get the little spacer in the wrong space. With this style of cassette and the way it's kind of broken up or it constructs, we're going to use the same technique as we've used on the chain set. And that's, we're going to brush it to physically remove as much as we can, and then we're going to use the foaming degreaser to chemically try and lift it and give it another physical scrub. Okay, there's still some stubborn bits of dirt and grime in here, and including, well, it looks to be a leaf, so I'm going to use a pick just to try and pull out and tease out those extra bits of, well, rubbish. With most of the dry grit and mud brushed off this one, any more will come off hopefully with the chemical clean and the physical clean with that chemical cleaner as well. So we can put that to one side. Now we can work on the rest of the cassette. Now, depending on how yours comes apart, you might be able to clean more of the individual cogs, but just remember that if there is a spacer, remember where it goes in the order of stacking them up, because you can get yourself in a muddle, and then A, your gears won't index properly as a minimum, and worse, well, you might send your chain over the top of your cassette or in between your frames. So make sure that you keep the order correct. Once we've physically removed a lot of that dust and grime, well, there's still some on there. So we're going to use the degreaser and our cloth to make sure that we can wipe all of the cassette, all the individual cogs up, so they're all as clean as they can be. The derailleur is still on the bike, but we can still give it a really good clean. Now, best practice for me is, again, do a dry brush and make sure that you remove as much of that dry detritus as you can. Time to get it chemically clean. So we're going to use the degreaser again, applying it to our cloth first, and we're doing this because, well, not just because it's slightly neater and tidier, but mainly so that we don't cross-contaminate any parts of the bike. And especially at the back of the bike, it's surprisingly easy to contaminate your rear caliper. And doing that is bad because, well, if you're using a really aggressive cleaner, then it can damage the seals inside, and that means longer term you might get, well, a poor performing rear brake. But even short term, you could contaminate your rear brake pads, and that means it will get at best a squeakier performance, and at worst, well, brakes that don't really work. So applying it to the cloth and then wiping it on there can really help minimise cross-contamination. Okay, with everything now cleaned, it's time to look at how the chain has gone in its lovely chain bath. And wow, looks like I'm sort of panning for gold here, but all I've got is actually a wonderfully clean chain. With that aside, it's time to take it out, let the remaining degreaser drip off, pop that to one side, time to dry it and give it a scrub. depending on what degreaser you've used, some just evaporate off, leaving, well, just a film that you'll have to wipe off with a dry cloth. Now, PTs, especially their milder degreaser, needs to be washed off to ensure that when you apply the lube, well, there's no degreaser on there to eat away that lube. So we're just going to rinse this now, and then we're going to dampen down a fresh cloth and wipe down the drivetrain bits that we've cleaned up with the degreaser. Okay, everything is now really clean and should be washed and should also be nice and dry. So now it's reassembly time, which, well, is pretty simple because it's the same as how we took it apart. But with the addition of, in some parts, you'll need a bit of this. Just go sparingly, and if there's any excess that's sticking out and you can see, just wipe it off. With everything reinstalled, I did use a fresh new quick link, as you're meant to do with these Shimano chains. Everything is ready to go, almost. We've got to add lube. There's lots of different lubes available for lots of different weather and trail conditions. I'm going to use this all-weather, which I can just put on and basically ride straight away. But depending on what lube you're going to use, say some of the wax-based ones, they need a little bit of time to dry so the wax is left and the water emulsion can evaporate off. How you apply with both different lubes is pretty much the same. Working from just by the chainring, we're going to work back towards the rear mech, and we're going to leave a very small little drop on each of the rollers. And we don't want it on the side plate, we don't want it on the inner plate, we just want it on that roller and just a small drip. Work all the way to the rear mech, and then crank the crank round, and then work on the next section of dry chain. Do that until you've worked on the whole chain and then wipe off the excess. It's really important to do that because we want just the chain lube underneath that roller, underneath that little bearing, if you like. We don't want it anywhere else. So wiping off the excess is a key part of lubing a chain. If you've enjoyed this, well, make sure that you give it the thumbs up and the like. And if you enjoy the content that we're creating here on the GMBN Tech channel, then do make sure you subscribe so you don't miss anything. And it really helps us keep creating great content just like this.